The sound of rushing water will haunt me for the rest of my life. I didn't know it then, but that single, mundane noise from the bathroom plumbing was the sound of my mother erasing my dead son from existence. She called my grief an inconvenience. I call her a monster. Grief is not a process. It is a location. When my son, Leo, died of sudden infant death syndrome at just 10 weeks old, my husband, David, and I moved into that terrible place permanently. The physical world around our home in Seattle continued. It rained. The garbage trucks made their weekly rounds. The mail arrived. But inside our walls, time had stopped entirely. Leo was our miracle. After 5 years of grueling IVF treatments, 3 miscarriages, and a drained savings account, he had finally arrived. He had David's dark curls and my hazel eyes. For 10 weeks, our lives were a chaotic, exhausting, beautiful blur of bottles, swaddles, and lullabies. And then, on a random Tuesday morning in November, I went into his nursery to wake him, and the world ended. We chose cremation. The thought of putting his tiny body into the cold, damp earth was something my fragile psyche simply couldn't handle. We picked out a custom, sapphire blue ceramic urn. It was small enough to hold in one hand, painted with delicate silver stars, and it sat precisely in the center of our living room fireplace mantel. Next to it was a framed photo of Leo sleeping, a plaster cast of his tiny footprint, and a single white candle that I kept lit from the moment I woke up until the moment I dragged myself to bed. That mantle became my shrine. It was the anchor holding me to the earth. I would spend hours just sitting on the rug, staring at the deep blue glaze, talking to him. David grieved differently. He threw himself into his work as an architect, retreating into blueprints and structural loads. But every night when he came home, the first thing he did was walk over, touch the urn, and whisper, "Hey, buddy." Then, my mother arrived. Margaret Sullivan, known to her country club friends in Chicago as Peggy, did not do grief. She did galas, she did passive-aggressive compliments, and she did appearances. When she flew in to take care of us, I should have known better than to let her through the front door. But I was hollowed out, a shell of a human being, and David was desperate for someone to help keep the house running while he tried to keep his firm from going under. Within 24 hours, the toxic positivity began. "Chloe, darling, you need to open these blinds. It's like a mausoleum in here," she announced on her second morning, violently yanking the velvet curtains apart to let the harsh grey light flood the living room. I hissed and shielded my eyes from the couch, where I hadn't moved in 2 days. "Mum, please. My head is pounding." "A shower will fix that. And perhaps some lip gloss," she retorted, smoothing her immaculate blonde bob. Her eyes darted around the room before landing on the mantel. I saw her nose crinkle in disgust. She hated the urn. She had made that clear at the funeral, suggesting that ashes were unhygienic and lower class. "You know, Chloe," she started, her voice taking on that sickly sweet tone she used right before saying something horrific. "I read an article in Vogue about moving on from trauma. It says holding on to physical remnants only anchors you to the pain. Don't you think having that right in the center of the room is a bit much? It's very macabre." "It's my son, Mom," I whispered, my throat tight. "He stays right there. He's not your son, sweetheart. He's dust," she said, casually, as if she were pointing out a stain on the rug. "And frankly, it's making guests uncomfortable." "What guests?" I snapped, sitting up. "No one is coming over. Our baby just died." "Well, Mrs. Gable from next door brought over a casserole yesterday, and I could tell she didn't know where to look. It's an eyesore, Chloe. Put it in a closet. Or better yet, scatter it. Give yourself some closure." David walked into the room right at that moment, his tie loosened, dark bags under his eyes. He caught the end of her sentence. "Margaret," he said, his voice dangerously low, "the urn stays. Do not bring this up again. Are we clear?" My mother stiffened, offering a tight, plastic smile. "Of course, David. I'm only trying to help. You both just seem so stuck." She backed off for a week. She cooked meals, washed the dishes, and aggressively scrubbed the floors, all while sighing loudly enough to ensure we knew how burdened she was. But the tension in the house was a living, breathing thing. I caught her glaring at the mantel when she thought I wasn't looking. She started turning the framed photo of Leo face down when she dusted, claiming the frame was unstable. I would quietly turn it back upright. It was a silent, agonizing war of attrition. I thought her cruelty was just a byproduct of her narcissism. I thought she just couldn't handle not being the center of attention. I had no idea how far her obsession with curating a perfect, happy aesthetic went, nor the twisted length she was willing to go to enforce it. 6 weeks after Leo's passing, David and I finally agreed to see a grief counselor. Dr. Sylvia Aris came highly recommended. I didn't want to go. Leaving the house meant leaving the urn, and my separation anxiety was paralyzing. But David was unraveling, his patience fraying, his sleep non-existent. For him, I put on a pair of jeans that hung loosely off my depleted frame, tied my hair back, and walked out the front door. My mother practically shoved us out. "Take your time. Enjoy the fresh air. Have a coffee afterward." She beamed, practically locking the deadbolt behind us. The session was brutal. Dr. Aris made us confront the jagged edges of our reality. I sobbed until I dry heaved. David confessed his terrifying feelings of failure as a father. But when we walked out of the clinic 2 hours later, the air felt a fraction lighter. For the first time in a month and a half, David held my hand as we walked to the car. "Let's just drive for a bit," he suggested quietly. "Maybe get a coffee at that drive-through by the lake." We were gone for a total of 3 hours. 3 hours. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked perfectly normal. But the moment David unlocked the front door and pushed it open, a chemical wave hit me. The smell of industrial bleach and overwhelming floral room spray was thick in the air, burning the back of my throat. "Mum," I called out, slipping off my shoes. "Why does it smell like a hospital in here?" There was no answer, but I heard the clinking of glass from the kitchen. I walked into the living room, intending to sit on my usual spot on the couch. I glanced toward the fireplace, a reflex ingrained in my bones. The mantel was bare, my breath hitched, the candle was gone, the plaster footprint was gone, the framed photo was gone, and the sapphire urn was gone. A heavy, ornate, incredibly ugly crystal vase full of fake plastic hydrangeas now sat directly in the center of the mantel. "David!" I gasped, the sound choking in my throat. "David!" He ran in from the hallway, alarmed by the sheer terror in my voice. He followed my gaze to the fireplace. The color drained from his face instantly. "Margaret!" David roared, his voice shaking the windows. "Margaret, get in here right now!" My mother sauntered out of the kitchen, holding a glass of Pinot Grigio. She was wearing her pearls. She looked entirely unbothered, though there was a manic, triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Oh, you're back. How was the shrink?" she asked breezily, taking a sip of wine. "Where is it?" I whispered, my legs suddenly giving out. I collapsed onto my knees on the rug. "Mum, where did you put him? Where is my baby?" "Oh, get up, Chloe." Honestly, she scoffed, rolling her eyes. I've done you a massive favor. I spent all morning cleaning, and I finally fixed the energy in this room. You're welcome. David crossed the room in 3 massive strides, looming over her. Where is the urn, Margaret? She took a step back, her facade cracking slightly under David's sheer fury. I got rid of it, she said defensively. You two were wallowing. It's unnatural. Every day, sitting here, crying over a pot of dirt. You're making the house depressing. Someone had to be the adult and rip the Band-Aid off. You threw him away? I screamed, the sound tearing my vocal cords. You put my son in the garbage? I scrambled to my feet, ready to run outside to the trash bins, ready to dig through rotting food with my bare hands to find the sapphire ceramic. I didn't put it in the garbage, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, cold register. Animals get into the garbage. It's not dignified. The room spun. David grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her once, hard. What did you do? My mother looked me dead in the eye, her expression entirely devoid of empathy, replaced instead by a sick, twisted pride. I opened the container. I poured the ashes into the master bathroom toilet, and I flushed. Silence dropped over the room like an anvil. The words didn't compute. They bounced off my brain, refusing to be absorbed. Flushed. Toilet. My baby. You're lying, David breathed, stumbling backward as if he'd been physically struck. You're lying. I most certainly am not, she sniffed, adjusting her cardigan. I threw the hideous pot in the dumpster down the street. It took 3 flushes to get all the grit down, but the pipes are perfectly fine. I bleached the bowl afterward. Now you can finally move on and start trying for another baby. A healthy one. A primal, guttural noise ripped out of my throat. I didn't think. I just moved. I sprinted up the stairs, tripping over my own feet, tearing down the hallway to the master bathroom. I fell against the doorframe. The smell of bleach here was eye-watering. The toilet bowl was sparkling white. But there, on the edge of the porcelain rim, just under the seat hinges, was a faint, unmistakable smear of grey dust. Leo. I collapsed onto the cold bathroom tiles, screaming. It wasn't a cry of sorrow. It was the sound of an animal being torn apart alive. I clawed at the porcelain, frantically trying to wipe the grey dust onto my fingertips, pressing it to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably into the toilet bowl. She hadn't just taken his memory. She had desecrated his physical remains. She had treated my beautiful, perfect boy like human waste. Downstairs I heard a crash. I heard David shouting, a stream of profanities I had never heard my gentle husband use in our 10 years together. I heard the sound of glass shattering, probably my mother's wine glass. "Get out!" David was roaring, his voice echoing up the stairwell. "Don't pack your bags. Leave your things. Get out of my house right fucking now before I kill you. You can't treat me like this," my mother shrieked back, her pristine composure finally shattering. "I did this for you, David. Chloe is broken. She was never going to be a real wife to you again as long as that thing was staring at her. Get out!" The front door slammed with such force, the pictures on the hallway walls rattled. I lay on the bathroom floor, the cold tile pressing against my cheek, my fingers stained with bleach and a microscopic trace of grey ash. My mind was breaking into a million jagged pieces. She was gone, but so was Leo, and as I lay there, listening to David's heavy footsteps slowly ascending the stairs to come find me, my mother's parting words echoed in my head. "I did this for you, David." A tiny, poisonous seed of doubt planted itself in my fractured mind. Why was she so sure David wanted this? Why was she so confident that getting rid of the urn would save our marriage? I didn't know it yet. But my mother's horrific act wasn't just a sociopathic attempt to clean house. It was a cover-up. And the truth of what really happened to the sapphire urn was about to rip whatever was left of my life completely apart. For 3 days I didn't speak. I existed in a state of catatonic shock. David took an emergency leave of absence from his architecture firm to watch over me, pacing the hardwood floors, bringing me cups of tea that went cold on the nightstand. He had changed the locks to ensure my mother couldn't return, and he had hired a cleaning service to scrub the master bathroom with industrial solvents to remove the smell of bleach. But he couldn't scrub the image of that grey smudge on the porcelain from my mind. On the 4th morning, a strange, frantic energy hijacked my nervous system. It was the adrenaline of a mother who realizes she hasn't exhausted every possible avenue to protect her child. My mother had said she threw the hideous pot in the dumpster down the street. It was a communal bin used by our subdivision for oversized trash. The garbage trucks weren't scheduled to empty it until Friday. Today was Thursday. I threw off the heavy duvet. David was downstairs on a conference call. I pulled on a pair of rubber gardening gloves, grabbed a flashlight, and sprinted out the back door into the biting December cold. The dumpster was located behind a brick partition at the end of our cul-de-sac. It reeked of rotting food and damp cardboard. I didn't care. I hauled myself over the lip of the rusted green metal and dropped inside. For an hour, I tore through black plastic bags, gagging on the stench of spoiled milk and dirty diapers from the neighbors. My hands were scraped, my knees bruised, but I was a woman possessed. Then I saw it. A pristine white kitchen trash bag, double knotted. It was the expensive brand my mother always insisted on buying. I ripped it open with shaking hands. Inside, beneath a layer of discarded paper towels and empty cleaning bottles, were heavy, jagged shards of deep blue ceramic. The silver-painted stars mocked me from the filth. She hadn't just thrown it away, she had smashed it into a dozen pieces. Tears streamed down my frozen cheeks as I carefully gathered the shards, pulling them to my chest. But as I reached for the thickest piece, the heavy base of the urn, I froze. Clinging to the inside of the ceramic base, clumped together by a drizzle of spilled coffee, was a thick paste of dark ash. I stared at it, my brow furrowing. I touched it with my gloved finger. It was black and powdery, leaving a dark charcoal streak across the blue glaze. Embedded within the sludge was a tiny, unburned splinter of charred oak. My breath caught in my throat, not from grief, but from a sudden, sharp spike of confusion. When the funeral director at the crematorium had handed us Leo's ashes, he had gently explained the process so we wouldn't be shocked by the weight. "Human cremains aren't like fireplace ash, Mrs. Miller," Mr. Harrison had said softly. "They are processed bone fragments. They resemble coarse, pale sand. They are heavy, and they are uniform." The sludge in my hand was light, powdery, and pitch black. It was wood ash. I scrambled out of the dumpster, clutching the base of the broken urn, and ran back to the house. I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to the living room fireplace. I dropped to my knees and ran my gloved hand over the hearth, dipping my fingers into the cold remnants of the fire we had burned on Thanksgiving. I held my left hand, smeared with the fireplace ash, next to my right hand, which held the ash from the shattered urn. They were identical, down to the tiny, fibrous splinters of oak firewood. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mother hadn't flushed Leo. She had flushed fireplace ash. But why? Why go through the elaborate, psychotic theater of pretending to flush my baby's remains? Why smash the urn and fill it with debris from our own hearth. Unless she wasn't the one who filled it. I looked up at the empty mantle. The timeline hit me with the force of a freight train. My mother had hated the urn, yes, but she had been terrified of David's anger. She wouldn't have dared touch it unless she had leverage, unless she had discovered a secret so damning it gave her the ultimate power in our house. "I did this for you, David." Her screaming voice from the hallway echoed in my ears. The missing candle, the unstable picture frame she kept turning face down. She hadn't been dusting. She had been snooping. She had picked up the urn, felt that the weight was wrong, looked inside, and discovered the truth. And she had confronted my husband. I found David in his home office, staring blankly at a CAD rendering on his monitor. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes widening at my disheveled appearance, the dirt on my clothes, and the heavy shard of sapphire ceramic clutched in my hand. "Chloe? What happened? Are you bleeding?" He stood up immediately, his face etched with genuine concern. "Where is he?" I asked. My voice was completely flat, devoid of emotion, devoid of life. David stopped. "What?" I stepped forward and dropped the ceramic base onto his pristine glass desk. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "I went to the dumpster. I found the urn. And I found what was inside it, David. It's wood ash. From our fireplace." All the blood drained from David's face. He looked at the shard, then at me, his jaw working but producing no sound. "Human ashes are pale and heavy, David. Bone fragments," I recited, quoting the funeral director. "Wood ash is black and powdery. My mother flushed fireplace soot, which means the urn was already empty when she smashed it. Where is my son?" David collapsed into his leather desk chair as if his strings had been cut. He put his head in his hands, his fingers gripping his dark curls, and let out a broken, wretched sob. "I'm sorry," he wept. "Chloe, I am so sorry." "Where is he?" I repeated, slamming my hand onto the glass desk. David flinched. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his eyes begging for a forgiveness I knew I would never possess. "The lake," he whispered. "The drive-through by the lake. Behind the weeping willows where we had our first picnic. I took him there 3 weeks ago." The room tilted. 3 weeks ago. For 21 days, I had been sitting on the rug, crying over, talking to, and worshipping a pile of charred oak wood from our fireplace. Why? The word barely made it past my lips. "Because you were dying!" David yelled, his sorrow suddenly twisting into desperate, defensive anger. "You were fading away into a ghost, Chloe. You wouldn't eat. You wouldn't sleep. You just stared at that fucking pot. It was anchoring you to the worst day of our lives. You were never going to heal as long as his ashes were in this house. I had to break the spell. I thought if I scattered him somewhere beautiful, somewhere that meant something to us, he would be at peace. And eventually, I would tell you. When you were stronger, you violated my son's remains," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the nuclear explosion going off in my chest. "You stole him from me, and then you filled his urn with garbage and let me pray to it." "I panicked," David pleaded, reaching for my hand. I snatched it away. "I didn't know what to do. I needed you to think he was still there so I could figure out how to break it to you." "And my mother?" I demanded, the final piece of the puzzle locking into its sickening place. David squeezed his eyes shut. "She was dusting the mantle 2 days ago. She knocked the urn over. The lid popped off. She saw the ash spilling out. She knew what cremains looked like. She handled her own father's funeral. She confronted me. And you made a deal with her." "She offered," David cried out. She said you were too fragile to handle the betrayal of me doing it behind your back. She said she was already the villain in your eyes anyway. She told me she would take the fall. She'd get rid of the fake ashes, make it look like a malicious act of cleaning house, and take the blame. She said she'd be the bad guy, Chloe. She said it was the only way to save our marriage without you hating me. A cold, terrifying numbness washed over my entire body. My mother and my husband, the two people supposed to protect me, had conspired to gaslight me, manipulate my grief, and desecrate the memory of my dead baby, all under the twisted, sick guise of saving me. She poured soot into the toilet and let me claw at the porcelain like an animal, I whispered, remembering the bleach, the burning in my throat, the sheer agony of thinking Leo was in the sewage system. And you stood there, you yelled at her, you threw her out, you watched me break in half on that bathroom floor, and you played along. Chloe, please, I want a divorce, I said. David froze. No, Chloe, please. We can get through this. Dr. Orris can help us. Do not say her name. Do not say another word to me, I interrupted, backing away toward the door. You're going to pack a bag. You are going to leave this house. You are going to call your lawyer, Samantha Higgins, and tell her to expect paperwork. If you are not gone by the time I get back, I will call Officer Reynolds at the precinct and press charges against you for the illegal mishandling of human remains. Where are you going? David sobbed, standing up, reaching out to me as if I were a mirage evaporating in the desert. I looked at the man I had loved for a decade, the father of my lost child, and felt absolutely nothing. I'm going to the lake, I said. I turned and walked out of the office, out of the house, and out of his life. I drove in silence to the water's edge, parked beneath the weeping willows, and sat on the frozen grass. I didn't have a sapphire urn anymore. I didn't have a husband. I didn't have a mother. But as I looked out at the rippling, grey water, I finally knew where my son was. Grief didn't destroy my marriage. Deceit did. I left David the night I uncovered the truth and never looked back. Today, I live in a quiet apartment overlooking the lake where my husband secretly scattered my son. I don't have a sapphire urn anymore, but every morning I watch the sunrise hit the water, and I know Leo is there. And finally, I am breathing again.